Listen, my people. Many years ago, in a busy compound in Ududu village, there lived a widow called Mama Ada, whose arrival in that village became the most talked about thing since the time Deacon Okonko's goat entered the church during a baptism service and refused to leave. But let me not get ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. Mama Da arrived in Ududu on a Tuesday morning with one portmanteau bag, 2 wrappers, and an energy that the village had never encountered before. She came down from a lorry quietly, looked left, looked right, and walked straight into the compound behind Mama Chieri's house to rent the small room at the back. Nobody knew her. Nobody sent for her. She simply appeared like something the village needed but had not known to ask for. Now, the reason Mama Da left her original town was not a happy story. Her husband had died 2 years before, and the very week they buried him, the man was not even properly cold. His family arrived at her door with their mouths, their entitlement, and apparently a full plan they had prepared in advance. They dismantled that house systematically. Television gone, chairs gone, pots gone, the standing fan gone. They even pulled down the curtains from the windows. Her own curtains that she bought with her own money. They folded them neatly and packed them into a bag like it was a completely normal activity. Then they told her to go back to her father's house. She was a widow. Her usefulness to them had expired. Mama Da stood in her empty house and looked at the bare windows for a long time. Then she packed what little remained and boarded the first lorry going anywhere. The lorry stopped in Ududu, and Ududu is where she stayed. Now, she had not even finished settling into her new room when the village introduced itself to her in the most dramatic way possible. Right outside the compound gate, in the full view of God and every neighbor who had nothing better to do, a man was standing in the middle of the road, pointing his finger into his wife's face. This man was not small. He had the kind of stomach that announced him 3 steps before he arrived anywhere. The kind of stomach that said, this man has never suffered, has never skipped a meal, and possibly been eating other people's share on top of his own. His wife was a thin woman, tired eyes, baby strapped to her back, basket of firewood balanced on her head. She was standing completely still, not saying one word, just receiving everything the man was throwing at her. The man was shouting, "You are useless. You cannot do anything right. What kind of wife are you? My mother warned me about you." The wife said nothing. The baby said nothing. Even the firewood had more dignity than to respond. The neighbors around were watching, some shaking their heads, some pretending to sweep. Nobody said anything because in Ududu, this was not a scandal. This was just Tuesday morning. Mama Ada stood at the gate and watched the whole thing. She watched the man finish his performance, hiss like a deflating tire, and walk away with his stomach leading the way. She watched the wife quietly pick up the basket that had fallen, adjust the baby on her back, and continue walking like none of it had happened. Something moved inside Mama Ada's chest that morning. Not pity. She had finished with pity a long time ago. What she felt was recognition. Because she had been that woman. She had stood in that same spot, absorbing, enduring, managing, because that is what a good wife does. That is what everyone told her. That is what they tell all of them. She entered her room, sat on her portmanteau because there was no chair yet, and she thought for a very long time. By the time evening came, Mama Ada had made a decision. She was not a reckless woman. She did not make moves carelessly. So for 2 full weeks, she simply watched Ududu like a student conducting research. And what she found was not surprising, but it was painful. There was Nkechi, whose husband Emeka returned home every single night smelling of palm wine and somebody else's perfume. Not Nkechi's perfume, a completely foreign perfume that had no explanation and no business being on a married man. And Nkechi would still wake up before 5 in the morning to warm food for him. 5 o'clock for a man who came home smelling like a festival of bad decisions.
There was Adeze, whose husband Obina had not released housekeeping money in 3 months. His reason? Business is slow. But every week without fail, the man appeared with new shoes, different shoes every week. 1 week suede, next week leather. The week after, some complicated shoe with buckles. But business is slow. The shoes were not experiencing any slowdown. Only the money for his wife was moving slowly.
Then there was Chioma, whose husband, Chukwuemeka, and please note, this man carried 3 names, which should have alarmed somebody from the very beginning. Because in Mama Ada's experience, men with 3 names were always managing multiple complications. Would sit in the parlor from morning to evening watching television and scratching himself while Chioma cooked, swept, fetched water, bathed the children, chased the goat from the compound, and still required his permission before visiting her own mother. The same mother that pushed her into this world, but Chukwuemeka must permit it first. Everywhere Mama Ada looked, she saw the same arrangement. Women giving everything, men taking everything, and the whole village watching and calling it marriage. After 2 weeks, she went to the borehole. The borehole in Odudu was not just a place for water. Every sensible person in that village understood that the borehole was the processing center for all information, the headquarters, the CNN. If something happened anywhere in Odudu, the full details with analysis and personal opinions would be available at the borehole by the following morning. So Mama Ada carried her bucket there one morning and began talking casually, gently, the way you blow on hot soup before you drink it. She said, "Nkechi, how are you? You look tired." Nkechi said, "I'm fine, Mama Ada." Mama Ada said, "Are you sure? Because the way you were moving this morning, warming that food for a man who came home at midnight smelling like..." Nkechi's head turned so fast, the bucket nearly launched itself into the air. "What did you say?" Mama Ada smiled softly. "I'm saying you deserve better than what you are accepting." Silence landed heavily. Nkechi stared at this woman like she had spoken in a language that did not officially exist. Because nobody in Ududu said you deserve better. They said endure. They said pray. They said manage. They said your mother endured her own. Your grandmother endured her own. Endurance is simply the family tradition passed down through generations. Who are you to break the chain? But Mama Ada said you deserve better. And something inside Nkechi cracked open quietly. Word moved through the village fast because good information travels faster than bad weather. By the next morning, women were finding creative reasons to visit Mama Ada's room. One came to borrow pepper, one came to ask about a dream, one just stood at the door and said, "I heard something," without specifying what she heard. By the end of the week, that small room behind Mama Chinyeri's compound was packed with women sitting on the floor, on buckets, on borrowed stools, arranged like students who had finally found the teacher they needed. Mama Ada stood before them and said one thing, just one thing. "My sisters, I am not asking you to fight your husbands. I am not asking you to disrespect them or destroy your homes. I am asking you to do one simple thing. Stop giving what you are not receiving. Match his energy. Aura for aura. If he gives cold, return cold. If he gives warm, return warm. Stop pouring yourself into a container with holes in the bottom." Mama Nonso, the oldest woman in the room, a stout woman whose face had witnessed several decades of life without flinching, raised her hand slowly. "What if he becomes angry?" Mama Ada looked at her directly. "Is he not already careless with you? What exactly are you afraid of losing?" Mama Nonso opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. Nothing came out because there was genuinely no answer to that question. The first person to try it was Nkechi. Emeka arrived home that Friday night in his usual condition. Late, loud, and smelling like the inside of a beer parlor that had also hosted a party. He walked straight to the kitchen, lifted the pot cover, inspected the contents, and immediately found a problem. "Nkechi, this food is cold. Why is the food cold?"
Now, normally, Nkechi would appear from wherever she was within seconds. She would apologize, she would rush to the kitchen, she would rewarm the food, serve it properly, and position herself nearby in case she needed anything else. This had been the routine for 8 years. Her body practically did it without instruction. But on this particular night, Nkechi was lying on the bed with an old magazine she had already read twice. She turned one page. Emeka appeared at the bedroom door, eyes red, face tight. "Did you hear me? The food is cold." Nkechi looked up slowly, the way someone looks up when they have been mildly interrupted from something important. "Huh? Huh? The food is cold?" Nkechi studied him for a long, careful moment. Then she said, pleasantly, like a woman giving useful directions to a lost stranger, "The fire is in the kitchen." And she turned another page. My people, the silence in that room was so complete, you could hear the gecko on the wall reconsidering its life choices. Emeka stood there and could not process what had just happened. 8 years. 8 full years of marriage, and this woman had just looked at him, heard his complaints, and redirected him to the kitchen like a receptionist handling a simple enquiry. He looked at her, he looked at the magazine, he looked at the kitchen, he looked at his own hands. Then slowly, like a man walking through something he did not understand, Emeka went to the kitchen and rewarmed his own food by himself, with his own hands, for the first time in 8 years. He came back and ate in complete silence. The only sounds in the house were his chewing and the occasional peaceful turn of Nkechi's magazine page. That night, Nkechi lay in the dark with a small smile on her face and one clear thought in her head. So, this thing actually works. News of Nkechi's Friday night reached the other women before Saturday morning finished. Adaze decided to try her own version. Obinna came to her asking about his special white shirt, the one she was required to iron with particular care and attention, like it was a diplomatic document going to an international summit. Adaze did not look up from the bin she was sorting. She said, "It's in the wardrobe." She did not iron it. She did not stand up. She did not explain. She did not apologize. Obinna ironed it himself for the first time in the history of their marriage. The result was something to behold. He emerged from the bedroom wearing a shirt with creases standing at attention on both shoulders like mountain ranges. One collar was pointing upward, the other had made a separate decision entirely. He looked like a man who ironed his shirt while wearing it in the dark during a power cut on a moving vehicle. Adaze watched him leave through the window. She placed both hands over her mouth. She held them there until he disappeared around the corner. Then she sat on the floor and laughed until her stomach hurt. Then there was Chioma and Chukwuemeka. Chioma's approach was simple and targeted. If Chukwuemeka was giving her silence and attitude, she was not giving her proper cooking. She made plain rice, just rice. White, boiled, unseasoned, unaccompanied rice. No stew, no fish, no pomo, no effort, no love. Rice. Chukwuemeka sat in front of his plate and stared at it the way you stare at a document that contains bad news. "What is this?" "Food," Chioma said. "Where is the stew?" "I didn't make stew today." "Why?" Chioma turned and looked at him with the calm of a woman who had made peace with her decision 3 hours earlier. "I was tired." That was everything. The complete response. I was tired. Full stop. No further explanation. Chukwuemeka sat with his 3 names and his plain rice and said absolutely nothing. He ate every grain in silence. Then he went to bed at 8 o'clock like a child who had received a punishment he could not argue against. Within 2 weeks, Odudu had shifted. It happened quietly, the way a season changes. You don't notice the exact moment, you just realize one morning that something is different and you cannot point to when it changed. The men started noticing small, unexplainable things. Food was ready, but nobody was announcing it like they were kings receiving tribute. The compound was clean, but their personal belongings were no longer being arranged by invisible, devoted hands. Clothes were washed, but ironing required a direct request, a polite one.
The first one to raise alarm was Emeka. He appeared at Obina's compound one evening carrying the energy of a man with urgent news. "Guy," he said, sitting down, "something is wrong with Nkechi." Obina looked up. "What happened?" "She is behaving strange. She looks at me, that's all. She just looks." Obina was quiet for a moment. "Funny you say that. I ironed my own shirt last week." Emeka stared at him. "You ironed your own shirt? The thing came out badly." They looked at each other with the expression of two men who were beginning to suspect they were part of a larger situation. Then Chukwuemeka walked through the gate. Nobody called him, nobody sent for him. He sat down, looked at both of them and said, "Is it your wives too?" The three men sat together that evening, frowning deeply, like men who had been eating free food their whole lives and had just been handed a bill. Emeka said, "Somebody must have taught them this thing." Obina said, "My own thinking is that new widow, Mama Ada." Chukwuemeka's eyes narrowed. "The one that came with one bag?" "That one." All three of them turned to look in the general direction of Mama Chianre's compound, as though the walls would reveal something useful. And just like that, a name had been attached to the problem. Within days, it was not just three men. There were many, gathering in various corners of Ududu, at the palm wine spot, under the big tree, all saying different versions of the same complaint. This Mama Ada came to this village with nothing and has since been filling our wives' heads with dangerous ideas. She is a troublemaker. She is an outsider. She came with one bag and now look at the state of things. The village chief, Igwe Obiefune, was a large, self-important man who approached every minor village issue with the gravity of a national emergency. When the complaints reached him, he straightened his red cap, picked up his fly whisk and called a full village meeting. Half of Ududu attended. Men arranged themselves on one side, women arranged themselves on the other. The children climbed the mango trees and positioned themselves along the branches because nobody sent them away, and they understood instinctively that this was going to be worth watching. Igwe Obiefune settled into his chair at the center with the composure of a man who had been preparing for this moment. He surveyed the gathering. He allowed the silence to stretch for effect. Then he cleared his throat. "It has come to my attention," he began in his most serious voice, "that a certain woman in this village has been teaching our wives to disrespect their husbands. This is unacceptable behavior. It is against our tradition. It is against the peace of Ududu. It cannot continue." The men clapped. Several of them nodded with the vigor of people vindicating a long-held position. The women said nothing, but something was moving through their side of the gathering. Glances, small loaded glances exchanged in half a second that carried full conversations inside them. Emeka stood up. Of course it was Emeka. "Igwe," he announced with the confidence of a man who had rehearsed this speech on the way there. "This Mama Ada must leave this village immediately. She arrived with nothing. She has no husband here, no family here, nobody invited her, and she has been using her mouth to destroy our peaceful homes."
What peace? Before Igwe Obiefune could even raise his fly whisk, Mama Ada stood up slowly from the back of the gathering. "Aura for aura," she said quietly. And just like that, as if those three words were a switch somebody had been waiting to flip, the women's side answered her. "Aura for aura." And then the talking started. Not one person at a time, all of them, together, simultaneously. The way women talk when they have been quiet for too long and have finally received a mission to open their mouths.
Adaze was on her feet before anyone noticed she had stood up. "Igwe, My husband said peaceful homes. I want somebody to explain to me which peace. The peace where I wake at 5 every morning while he sleeps till 8? That peace? Or the peace where housekeeping money has not entered this marriage in 3 months, but new shoes are entering every week? Which peace is he protecting? Obina's mouth fell open. Chioma did not even wait for Adaze to finish. My own husband has 3 names, 3 full names. I am begging this gathering, find me one contribution in that house that matches even one of those names. Chukwemeka opened his mouth. Don't, Chioma said. He closed it. The women's side exploded, clapping, laughing, shouting, agreeing, someone in the back making noise that had no name but made complete sense in that moment. The children in the mango trees leaned forward as one unit. Igwe Obiefun hitting his fly whisk on the arm of his chair. Order! Order! This is not a market. Igwe, a woman from the middle called back. With respect, sir, it is not a market, but some of these men have been treating us like market goods. Buy cheap, sell nothing, and return tomorrow expecting fresh stock. The fly whisk went still. Even the chief had no immediate response to that. One woman stood up and began listing things on her fingers, loudly, slowly, for the whole gathering to hear. He doesn't cook, he doesn't clean, he doesn't fetch water, he doesn't remember the children's school fees until the teacher sends a note home. He doesn't say thank you, he doesn't say sorry, he doesn't say good morning unless he wants something. She paused and looked at her husband directly. But he said peaceful home. Her husband was examining the ground beneath his feet with extraordinary concentration. Emeka, who had started this whole thing by standing up to speak, was now deeply regretting that decision. He was sitting with his shoulders pulled in, trying to make his large body as small as possible, which was not working because Emeka was not a small man and the crowd had already seen him. Then Nkechi stood up. Quiet Nkechi. 8 years of midnight food warming in Nkechi. The compound went still when she rose because something in the way she stood told everyone that what was coming was not a joke. Igwe, she said softly, my husband came to this gathering to report that I directed him to rewarm his own food one time, one single time in 8 years of marriage, and he called it disrespect. She paused. I want this gathering to help me find the correct word for 8 years of coming home drunk, eating food that was kept warm for you, and contributing nothing to the home that kept it warm. What is the official name for that behavior? Emeka had found something extremely interesting to look at near his left foot. The men's side of the gathering was no longer clapping. Several of them had developed a sudden need to look at various neutral objects, the sky, their hands, a nearby tree, anything that was not the face of their wife. Igwe Obiefune tried again. Let us please return to the matter of Mama Ada. Oral for oral. The shout came from somewhere in the middle of the women's side and landed in the compound like a stone in still water. Then another woman picked it up. Oral for oral. Then another, then 5 more, then the whole women's side together, clapping, some standing, some already moving. Mama Ada stood in the middle of all of it, looking like a woman who had genuinely not planned any of this and was not sure what to do with what was currently happening to her. I don't need a title, she said. Nobody heard her. The name had already taken root. Mama Ada, aura for aura. It spread through that compound in real time, passing from mouth to mouth like something that had always existed and people were only just discovering. By the time it had been shouted 10 times, it already sounded like it had been her name since birth. One woman started a song. Nobody organized it. It simply began the way things begin, when a large group of people feel exactly the same thing at exactly the same moment.
The children in the mango trees began clapping. One of them fell off a branch in the excitement, landed in the grass below, looked around to confirm nobody important saw it, and immediately continued clapping. Igwe Obiefune looked at his fly whisk. He looked at the gathering. He looked at the men around him, most of whom were either staring at the ground, having quiet private crises, or had somehow made themselves look smaller than they were when they arrived. He looked at his fly whisk again. Then Papa Ikechukwu tapped his walking stick once, and the noise reduced slightly, because that stick commanded a respect that the fly whisk had lost about 20 minutes ago. The old man waited until he had sufficient quiet, then he spoke. If you do not like the aura you are receiving, ask yourself what aura you were giving. He tapped again. An echo only returns what you first shouted into the valley. These women are not wicked, they are being mirrors. A different kind of silence fell. Not the silence of people waiting for the next thing, the silence of people sitting with something they had just heard and could not immediately argue with. And in that silence, Emeka put his face in his hands. After a long moment, in a voice that came from somewhere very small, I have not been a good husband. The whole gathering heard it. Nkechi heard it. She did not move, she did not look at him, she sat straight and looked ahead. Igwe Obiefune looked at his fly whisk one final time. Then he sighed the sigh of a man making peace with something larger than himself. Meeting, he said quietly, is dismissed, and he went home. By the following week, Mama Ada, aura for aura, had a proper seat at the women's meetings. Not a borrowed stool, an actual chair, carried from Mama Nonson's house and placed specifically for her, with her name attached to it. Somebody had written Mama Ada Aura for Aura on a piece of cardboard and tied it to the back of the chair with a piece of string. It was not elegant, but it was official. The men of Ududu observed all of this from a safe distance and made very few public comments. Privately, several of them had begun making quiet adjustments at home, without announcement, without explanation, without admitting to anything. Obina started leaving housekeeping money on the table every Monday. He never mentioned it, Adaize never mentioned it, she simply collected it, and from that week forward, there was always stew on the rice. Chiomeka reduced his television hours. He did not say why. Chioma did not ask. She noted it the way women note all things, silently, completely, and permanently. And Emeka. 2 months after the meeting, Emeka was spotted at the borehole with a bucket in his hands. Not just any bucket, the green one with the yellow handle. Nkechi's bucket, the one that sat in their kitchen since the first week of their marriage. The women who saw him stopped walking completely. They stood and looked because this was Emeka, the same Emeka who had not lifted anything heavier than a fork in 8 years of marriage. That Emeka was at the borehole at 6 in the morning, filling a bucket and trying carefully not to spill. One woman nudged the other. Neither spoke. Emeka looked up, saw them looking. He straightened his back and held the bucket with both hands. "Good morning," he said, with what remained of his dignity. "Good morning, Emeka," they replied together. They continued walking, and the moment they turned the corner, they grabbed each other and laughed the kind of laugh that comes from deep, genuine, long overdue satisfaction. Mama Nonson, coming slowly behind them, saw the whole thing. She smiled to herself, tapped her walking stick once on the ground, and kept walking. Some lessons, she thought, don't need a sermon. Ududu teaches them on its own. Eventually.
Thank you for staying till the end. See you in our next story, and trust me, you do not want to miss it. Bye!